we're back. This is Animation Dissection, brought to you by Catastrophic Hard Drive Failure. For the love of God, back up your stuff while you have the chance. Anyway, I'm Neeksy, here of course with Zorak. So how you doing, Zorak?
I'm doing all right.
How are any of us truly doing, Zorak, at this time in this world that we live in? God. So, hey, my computer might have been broken, but my spirit wasn't. Just kidding, it was too. So, sorry for the long absence, everybody. My hard drive failed in the middle of December, and I learned a valuable lesson of not only making sure you have very recent backups of absolutely everything you have, also not to have a scented candle in the same room as a computer if you have a poorly ventilated studio like I do. So that was a fun expense with my Christmas money. Anyway, you're not here to listen to me whine. You're listening to us whine about animation. So we have a special topic today, Moana. But before that, we have some animation news.
Yeah, so I only have a few things I really want to talk about this time in terms of news. The first big one, and I think kind of a big kind of topic of some amount of discussion in certain circles. I guess kind of a sort of niche, subject. But
we're a niche podcast, Zorak.
Yeah, so Your Name, not Your Name, but the anime called Your Name is now the best-selling anime in terms of box office of all time.
Yeah, it has done really well. Directed by Makoto Shinkai, who did... he's done a bunch of stuff. Voices of a Distant Star, 100, I think, kilometers per second, or
5 centimeters per second.
5 centimeters per second.
You got that at a wrong scale entirely.
Yeah, well, good thing I'm not the physicist. Okay,
Yes.
He also did. He's done a whole bunch of stuff. What was the one with the garden, the kid that draws shoes and stuff?
I think the Garden of Words.
Place Promise Beyond the Clouds. He kind of has a lot of, I would call it kind of repeated themes with his plots.
Yeah, that's the one thing that's not really kind of like where people are praising this thing, and it sounds like it's great animation and everything, but yeah, that's the one thing about him that always sticks out to me, in the sense of like, he's always got a very similar sort of thematic thing to all of his works. Though, to be fair, even like Satoshi Kon, focus entirely on, like, Khan's big thing was like, perception of reality and not knowing where, the mind and reality, necessarily.
And then he made Tokyo Godfathers.
Even that one has a bit of that with
a little bit. But,
it's got that religious element.
It's not always a crime. If you look at Shakespeare, he rewrote the same kind of play over and over and over again, but it's what you do with the premise and the voice you give the work that makes it kind of stand out. So it's possible. I ended up seeing this movie and I enjoyed it, even though I was like, yeah, this has kind of similar elements, especially to, I think, Place Promised Beyond the Clouds was very similar to this, but it still had its own voice to it, which made it not bother me as much as that normally would have. Unlike, let's say, a movie like Cars, which is a blatant copy of another movie, so that bothers me a bit more. But this one had some nice aspects to it. Also, just his backgrounds and direction in general are really good. So,
stylistically, he's brilliant. I just wish he would kind of branch out a bit more. Like,
he should definitely tell some new stories and stop doing some of these kind of interesting premises and then adding a kind of parallel world aspect to it, or time thing that he does. He does that a lot.
The parallel time thing is less that bothers me, and so much as every single one of his works is built around the bittersweet nature of, like, relationships falling apart in some way, and people forgetting
due to
about relationships over
circumstance.
time. Yes, like that. Every single one of his works involve that in some time. Some of them are more grounded than others. Yeah. Some of them are more alien and weird than others. I think this one falls somewhere in the middle, But
Yeah,
it's
it doesn't have them falling apart. This is like they're literally get to know each other and then suddenly realize, oh wait, we're separated by a weird time gap.
It does have the amnesia element.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Which he loves that crap too.
Yeah.
Literally falling apart in the sense of, oh, you forget about them. The ultimate fall apart.
Yeah.
But yeah, it still sounds good. Though, on a related note, and the second news item here is like, notably, even though they rushed it into the market in Los Angeles, was not nominated for an Academy Award.
Well, the Academy Awards are bullshit. So,
sure.
Sure. That was the year. I mean, there was one year where they didn't even give one to Paprika, like even a nomination. Right. So I was like, yeah, these guys are bullshit. I mean, the famous quote from one of one of the voters was that she thought, oh God, it's like, I'm just going to vote for like whatever Pixar is because, the whatever Chinese crap they show us. And it's like, well, okay, well, first of all, that wasn't a Chinese movie at all. You got the wrong country.
I think it was like Irish or something.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was the, it was by The Secret of the Kells guy, Song of the Sea. And she was like, whatever Chinese shit. And I was like, what?
I mean, yeah, like the Academy reflects the people who make up the Academy, to a certain degree.
And there's also a type of movie they like, and they're very easily swayed by branding. So, like, I think we need to really not put much artistic stock into what the Academy Awards are, and really view it as a kind of like a financial promotion thing more than anything. I mean, that's what it's really become. Is it's a business thing, and being able to just slap it on top of your movie for the DVD sales. I mean, that's kind of what it is now.
I mean, even with that, like a lot of the films that do get the the thumbs up of the Academy don't necessarily benefit from it all that much.
No,
like
I mean,
if you're like Academy bait, like you're not going to say like, oh, this film is now going to sell millions and millions because it was won an Academy Award. Like, probably not, but I don't know.
Well, a lot of these studios want to get those awards so that way they can still have the veneer that they are a prestige studio as opposed to just putting out, what everyone else does. So I think a bit of that is it's an ego thing. For the most part.
But also like directors love winning awards. Like everybody loves getting.
Well,
everybody
it's good to
awards.
be appreciated. It's just that whether or not there's value to that award is the major question here. And I majorly question it. And I think of the award ceremonies, the BAFTAs do a better job. I mean, yes, they're British focused, but they tend to not, do as many crashes as winners and various things like that.
I mean, sure, and that's partially because the BAFTAs have some amount of investment in the sense of like we're proper and we're respectable. We're not just here to jerk ourselves off essentially. Which the Academy Awards does not have any pretense of that. In any case, Well,
I would like to see this year the Academy Awards just go on strike, especially because one of the people that is up for an award is now unable to enter the U.S. to receive that award. And I think it would be really interesting is if they don't cancel it, it's just broadcast on TV with utter silence of a camera pointed at an empty stage for 2 hours.
I mean,
that would be interesting.
Given the type of people that make up the Academy, like...
I'm not saying it will happen. I think it should happen.
Well, no, it's more the sense of like, given the type of people that make up the Academy, I have no interest in watching the Academy Awards, but boy howdy, I bet that's going to be some entertaining watching for those that do, because I'm guessing that several people that win awards are going to have interesting things to say on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are going to pull a Meryl Streep this time. So it's going to be, it could be interesting, but at the same time, I think the more meaningful thing would be to just have it be fairly empty. Like, but that's me. That's my own kind of view of what I think. Also, I think it would be entertaining in a wacky deli kind of sense.
Oh, sure, but they're not going to. They're people are going to complain, but they're not going to not make money and get their awards.
Oh yeah, no, I know. Like I said, what I'm saying is what should happen, not what will.
Got to thread that middle road. So the other thing I wanted to briefly talk about is just because a new anime season started. And boy, is it not very good. I mean,
yeah.
Winter
Yeah.
seasons are never the best. In fact, one might say, I have said several times that they're kind of the worst. They're typically kind of the...
Well, if it's new stuff, some of the stuff that's come back it was always good, so that's fine. But anything new coming out this season is usually it's the fuck you, it's January kind of thing. Very much like that with the anime world, but. Also, but the one good one,
the big things.
The one that everyone is really excited about, Little Witch Academia, which is supposed to be done on Netflix, is not going to be shown until the whole thing is done and over with, because Netflix has their everything must be bingeable or nothing.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I would get it if, like, they had made the deal after the fact or something, or, like, there'd been something weird, or, like, I get the mindset behind that, but, like, you could just also support the episodic nature, and then anybody who wants to binge it could just binge it when it's done. Like, that's honestly, that's how I consume most of my media, is binge watching anyways. So, like, but the thing is, like, I don't get mad about things being available when I can binge. It's like, I just wait till
because that is when it's available, versus everybody else gets to watch it anyway in order as it's coming out in a highly anticipated series. And it's like, well, I don't think they understand their audience. A lot of, anime is a very niche audience, and many of them are internet savvy individuals, because that's the primary window in which people are able to access the thing that they're interested in. Therefore, it wouldn't be surprising if most of them know how to torrent. It's one of those things where it's like, if you just released it on schedule, in good time, kind of like what Crunchyroll does, you can actually gain the benefit of getting your hands on the broadcasting rights of this highly anticipated series. And I think just Netflix doesn't understand that specific market and the manner in which that audience views its content.
I mean, yes, and like, especially because history being what it is, like, there's an expectation amongst anime fans that, like, if I want my content and you're not making it available to me, I will go and get it. Like, that's the historical thing, Like, Crunchyroll has suffered in cases where there was, like, a couple day delay between, like, hey, the thing aired and now it's available to you. Like, because, like, maybe it's a little absurd at times in the sense that, hey, people are being a little like, oh, I need it now. But at the same time, it's like, freaking whatever. It doesn't, for one, with like a subscription, like, Netflix, like, they're going to get your money anyway. It doesn't matter if they have to watch, if I watch it through there or not. If I have a Netflix subscription, what does it matter? You're still getting my money. It doesn't actually matter.
Well, if they wanted to use it as a way to get people who weren't subscribing to it to subscribe to them,
oh, sure.
That's where they've lost it. I mean, that's the entire point of them getting it. I mean, Netflix lives and dies by having shows that people want to watch. I mean, that's kind of, it's like how the cable packages work in HBO and all that. It's if you build it, they will come. If you are becoming a barrier between that, I mean, I don't think it's just like anime fans that have this phenomenon. I think it was just a general phenomenon of path of least resistance. So, like,
it was a fact of life for the longest time, because that was the only way to get this stuff.
Yeah, and well, the thing that used to drive me nuts was during that big transition to doing television broadcasting online, where it was like, if you're watching, like, I don't know, a show on CBS or ABC or Fox or something, they would put in all these barriers in between you and being able to watch it at a later time online or something like that. So everybody went and just started torrenting those TV shows instead of watching them. What they could have just done, and what they finally started realizing, is, well, okay, after the broadcast date, if we just put it online that same night, we can now capture all those people and get them to watch the ads on our website, on Hulu, or on whatever, streaming service that we ourselves do. That's better than having them just torrent it for free. So, like, but because they didn't really understand how people view television, and the fact that so many people are net savvy enough to kind of, circumnavigate their roadblocks, it took them a while, but they started finally understanding that aspect. So it's really strange for Netflix, who I think was a big reason for a lot of people cutting their cords and jumping ship from standard broadcasting models, to have them completely misunderstand the viewing habits of that specific audience is really funny. Not in a haha sense, but in a what the fuck sense. So, yeah, I mean,
it's
overall.
also especially weird in the sense that, like, yeah, holding it off does benefit the binge watchers, but also I would say that anime fans as an audience are also, generally speaking, more inclined to buy things on physical media at this point because, like I said, historically speaking, everything was pirated, and the historical way of, like, oh, I'm going to show my support for this thing, or oh boy, I really like this thing, is that the physical media eventually would come over here in some form, and people would buy it as a kind of way to, to pay it forward or do something like that. In the sense, like, if you wait till after it's all the way out, you run the risk of people just watching it, via torrenting, and then just buying the DVDs or Blu-rays and completely bypassing Netflix in the first place.
Yes.
And they're also, the Japanese imports have the English subtitles anyway, so it's kind of like whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's basically a missed opportunity for them. So, I mean, I think Crunchyroll would have been a better place for that because,
Sure.
Yeah, that would have been a natural. I think in general, it's just that Netflix doesn't. Again, they just fundamentally don't understand that viewing audiences for different material have different behavior. That's kind of like a fundamental thing. So, I mean, it's strange. It feels like a throwback to that era when the television networks were just not understanding viewer habits. So, but I think Netflix has really just settled on binge or nothing. That's kind of been their way. And I mean, it works for certain shows, but it doesn't work when you're having to straddle between current broadcast and that kind of binge style. So, and also just the idea that people who watch, certain shows as they're coming out, they like that social aspect of everybody getting to see the new episode at the same time. So that way they can talk about it on social media, they can talk to each other, there's no spoiler aspect. So there's kind of a positive way to view, meeting out content over a period of time and having specific dates and times in which you release that content. So there's an aspect to it that can be useful versus a binge thing. You get that kind of on release day kind of buzz, but it doesn't necessarily... it doesn't always have staying power because you don't have people coming back to talk about it as it's developing.
Sure, and that's been a big thing, especially with anime. Like, look at how, with Crunchyroll, just recently last year, you had all the JoJo frenzy. People went crazy for JoJo. Yeah. Man, do I miss the concept of Fridays? And then there was God, why am I blanking on its name? The ice skating one. Why am I blanking?
Oh, Yuri on Ice,
Yuri on Ice was also had people blowing up about.
Yeah, so, and you'd see GIFs of new episodes as they came out, and that would. You always knew there was a new
episode, and I saw people who would basically very little to no interest in anime checking it out on Crunchyroll just because they saw so many people blowing up about it on Twitter. Like it's
and that's exactly it. That is the cascading effect of that kind of I'd say slow burn hype. Having constant exposure to it over a longer period of time will get people, interested in checking it out versus that one initial burst and then blah,
Yeah, like that's the weird thing. The crazy thing is like Crunchyroll really has managed with its, simultaneous like launching and managed to get those contracts or, they actually get that to go down and happen. Really,
well, they also are now
well
funding some of these shows themselves.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, it's a good way to, choose shows that they think will be able to have this kind of phenomenon going on. And that's good for them.
Yeah.
Can we very briefly talk about the new Pokemon anime?
Yes. Yes, I do. I want to talk about it.
So maybe we should touch on this a little later in greater detail, just because it'd be good to do.
Oh yeah,
so.
Yes, yeah. I mean, but
I want to very briefly talk about it. Man, so for those who've not been
it's finally
around,
good.
For those who've not been following over like the 20 fucking years of the Pokemon anime, it's been pretty rough because it's a show for kids and it's very, very low rent show for kids. Like not very good. A lot of
I mean, it's not Beyblade's kind of bad, but it's still that it's around that level.
It's an episodic thing that's built around trying to be as little, not even like inoffensive, but just like bland, almost deliberately, and to the point where the protagonist, in what is ostensibly at times like a shonen style, like you got to be the best, like no one ever was. The protagonist literally cannot ever succeed because that's too much for him.
Or at least not on his actual talents or merits.
Well, no, it's more in the sense like every major tournament, he always fails at the end of every single season they do based off of a game. He loses. He never wins, which is hilarious. Just like
What's the character arc, Zorak? I don't understand how this works.
And the fact that it's been 20 years and this kid's been 12 for 20 years and nothing's actually happened with him. So the general people, I'm sure, presume everybody knows what Pokemon is, but the whole thing is that basically every season, every time there's a new game, like, setting, they go and kind of reset it a bit and basically say like, oh, he's going to this new place. He's only got Pikachu and it's going to do some new stuff. And several times, she's starting back basically around Diamond, Pearl, Platinum. They started kind of putting plot in a bit to actually start doing some of the game plot lines because they didn't do that
but is it
then.
Good plot?
No, it's always been pretty bad.
It's been, and also the animation became even more half-assed as it went along, which is really strange. Where you start seeing some After Effects things where they'll just like, okay, instead of animating them flying off, we're just going to kind of use After Effects and spin them and then shrink the image. So it's
So they briefly went and actually tried going for doing an actual plot around the black and white times.
Yeah, another mistake.
Well, the issue is more in the sense of right when they were in the middle of doing their start of the plot episode, the Tohoku earthquake happened.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So that was the pivoted back to being completely episodic because they thought, oh, this would be way too harsh for kids. So they basically, and then eventually in the X and Y times, they went and did plot again and whatever, it was fine. But that plot was not great. So who cares? But anyways, the whole point is for this new one, they decided that after 20 years, they were going to do something new, and they've completely altered the art style. They've gone and made it comedic, and they've made him go to school in basically Pokemon Hawaii, because that's the setting of the new games. And man, somehow it's really good. The games are really good. It doesn't have
the whole journey aspect in the same traditional sense, but the thing is the traditional sense of that journey was really stiff and felt like it wasn't going anywhere anyway. So it was promising you something and then not delivering on it. Versus this, it's no, it's an everyday life situation. And yes, there's going to be stuff going forward and some progressive plot elements, but it's not going to kind of pretend that they're going in an organized path anywhere, which is nice. And also just, again, the animation and the humor overall is much more elevated. It's willing to have a personality to its animation. It has a few kind of meta humor elements to it that I think are really, really interesting. I think the character designer for this one is the same guy that did the character designs for Tsuritama. Yes, I think that's the same person. And again, it's great is they're willing to go off model. I think the what is it? I can't remember the name of the actress that does Jessie. They animate towards her stuff is just really good. I think they're letting her just go all out, and it's really great.
I mean, while I say this anime is good, let us pause and note that when I say it's good, 95% of that is everything that they've been doing with Team Rocket in this.
Oh yeah, no, it's yeah. And just some of the weird running gags, the beware thing, and never explaining it. Yes. That's the best part. Is they don't explain it; it just is, and you just have to accept it. And they keep coming up with new ways.
But then they roll with it. They finally they have this a recurring subplot of this giant bear continually kidnapping Team Rocket in the middle of the stuff, and then they just finally make this bear's lair, their home base because we're showing up here all the time anyways. Whatever.
Yeah, the Mimikyu stuff is amazing.
Oh god, they're rolling with this stuff in just a very good dumb way that works well. And like there's like a lot of good visual gags that just it feels like a kind of dumb gag that like I or like my friend Red would definitely make. Just like somebody's dumb, just like one off, just like, oh, like you throw a Pokeball at a cloister and it's like, oh, of course it's just gonna eat the fucking Pokeball. It's a fucking shell, and then you can't get it out because it closes the shell. God damn it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's taking the premise and actually doing something with it.
Sure.
It's saying like, okay, here are these creatures. Here is what that creature's kind of overall deal is. What can we kind of do with that in terms of gags and work with it, as opposed to kind of like, here's a generic thing. Here's the Pokemon of the week. All right, bye. I mean, that's kind of it. They never really engaged with it, and this one kind of takes it and goes like, okay, we're willing to make fun of it. We're willing to kind of come up with a weird scenario. It's like, wait, wouldn't this work like this if you kind of thought about it to its logical conclusion? Like, isn't that kind of weird? And they go with that. And I think that really helps it a lot. So I also just love the fact that they're willing to break the character models and do a bunch of great stuff with it. So like that sells it a lot. Like just the general reaction panels. I think the one that made the headline recently was that Team Rocket finally actually beat Ash in a battle.
Yes. and they basically have like an emotional breakdown over like, wait, we finally did it. Oh my God. And they didn't even have to cheat. They just did it outright. They finally won one. Good for them.
It was amazing. But that's what I mean by like the meta humor aspects to it. Like it's kind of like a 20th anniversary type of thing, I think, aspect to it, which helps it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like that episode also in general just has a lot of very good, like if you want to check out a random single episode of this show, I recommend episode 12 of Sun and Moon, which is that one we just talked about with the beach.
Yeah.
Oh, man,
I think my favorite is still just how they introduced Mimikyu and the horrifying noises, and the animation sells it so well of its movements and its herky-jerky aspect. It's like, holy shit, this thing's terrifying.
I also like with that most recent episode, they make a lot of jokes about drowning.
Well, Meowth fucking dies.
Meowth fucking drowns. It's left they can't find him floating in the water, dead,
face down in the water, and you see his spirit return to his body. He died.
It is fucking just hilariously dark in weird ways that just like it's not like oh they're making
and
it
it's not doing it in
either.
Edgy or like it's not trying too hard. It's like no, it just does it in a silly, fun way. It's being it's irreverent without trying too hard. It's great.
Yeah, sure, and it's still definitely for kids. Like I'm not saying that this is like high art.
No, it's just entertaining as hell.
It's just good.
Yeah, it's just fun.
It's good kid stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to have that. I'm not asking everything to be, I Claudius or something like that. Like, it's fine.
On the
just
other
make
hand,
it good.
I Claudius Pokemon. I don't know. Huh.
I Pikachu. I'm trying to think if anything else has happened other than I think regular show is now officially over. I was expecting Cartoon Network to kind of mete out the episodes a little bit longer, but they kind of just closed the door on it pretty quickly. Versus Adventure Time still has almost like a year or so of episodes to air before that will shut down. So, and they gave it a proper finale. So that's kind of the nice thing of having some of these shows get advance notices. They can kind of wrap things up and things like that.
I mean, that show got a long ass run, so good for them.
Yeah, that's the thing.
They got a long run.
Some people are really sad. I go 7 years is a really good run. That's not bad at all. That is about as many good seasons of Simpsons there were.
I mean, it's also not like they were also 7 years on and off. That was 7 continual years. They had 260 episodes. That's pretty good. That's nothing to beat.
And the thing is some things shouldn't run forever. Simpsons.
I mean, I made my opinion here very well known. I believe nothing should run forever because you know what? Because I like to own things, and I don't want to own everything. That's impossible. You
don't want to have to buy 30 DVD sets of The Simpsons.
I know it's that's too much. I'm fine. Hell. I'm fine with things running a long time as long as they're going towards a clearly visible end. One Piece. That manga's been going for fucking ever, but it has a trajectory to it. I can see the arc of where it's going. I can see it heading towards its end. It doesn't feel like it's jerking me around.
Yeah,
I don't
unlike what I would say,
around.
it's unlike its Jungian shadow opposite Bleach.
Yes, we're just felt like it's like they several times that thing could have fucking ended until I just gave up and just you don't know where the fuck you're going. Fuck that.
The way Bleach was basically it was murdered in a mercy killing by not only like the animation studio but also like Shonen Jump is like, okay, yeah, we're ending this. Like, just stop. Just stop it. We're done. This is too shitty even for us.
Yeah, Bleach is a very weird, interesting thing in how it went like, oh, we're good. It's popular. Brrr, just gone.
It's amazing how long something can run on initial good vibes and kind of like a audience goodwill before people finally go, wait a minute, this is bad. It might have always been bad. What was I thinking?
I mean, on the other hand, I will point out that a series that's been running almost as long as One Piece, and in a similar genre, in a similar magazine, Hunter x Hunter, routinely stops itself from running. Just like the creator says, I'm going to stop making it for a while, and it happens at a sufficient pace that people still are really into it. Every time it comes back, it still sells incredibly well.
I think that's Stockholm syndrome, Zorak. I think these people are held captive by what they think this is great. The gaps oddly don't allow the people to kind of reflect back on it beyond, oh, I want it to continue again, and then they have to wait, and rather than being exposed to it long enough to go like, wait a minute, I don't like the taste of this anymore. Wait a minute, this isn't going anywhere after all.
Yeah, it's really crazy when your weekly magazine manages to produce less frequently than goddamn Berserk, a monthly magazine where the creator also goes on hiatus for 6 months at a time.
But it also helps that the artist for that act is doing like art with it when it comes to the visuals of that thing. Like,
yes,
holy
Berserk
shit.
At least. Berserk like, at
there's
times
kind of
feels
a reason.
Like, yes, Berserk at times also feels like the review's like, okay, you don't have to draw armor in every single person, man. You can tone it down a bit. Just tone it down a bit.
He's like one of those French comic artists. It's like, God damn it, I'm making art here. I don't care. Screw your schedules.
We spent 7 years on a boat. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I would argue against. I don't think I agree with you with One Piece, but that's me. That's my. I have particular bugaboos about One Piece, but
you should like the manga for that is really.
Oh,
good.
okay. Yeah. I think
the
my
anime,
problem is
I'm with you. I'm with you with the anime.
Yeah. Also, the anime I was exposed to of it was the dub, and
yeah.
Here's the thing. I mean, I do voice stuff, so I'm not against dubbing at all. I think sometimes dubs could be really good. Other times they could be really, really bad.
Yeah.
and some shows don't, and it's not that. Sometimes it's not the fault of the actors or even the voice director. It's just that show does not benefit from acting. Fundamentally. Some things are better left in comic form, and some things are better in animation form. And One Piece is best left in comic form, where people declaring how they feel at all times, just screaming it is more acceptable and less grating and annoying. Like that line from Futurama. Fair, it's like, you can't have characters just to shout what they feel all the time. That makes me angry.
Yeah. I mean, like, One Piece is just a good comic. Like, I realize that a lot of people don't have a lot of interest in checking it out, and we're going far afield at this point. I will say we'll reel it in. We'll start talking about Moana in a sec, guys. But in the sense, like, it just has got a lot of heart, and it does a lot of good things for what ostensibly is just yet another like weekly Punch Man comic. It does a lot of interesting things. It's got a lot, and also the fact that it is the secret thing about One Piece is that it is really well plotted out, like in terms of like how things sequence and such. Like, there's a lot of stuff where you go back to like things.
There's payoff, essentially.
Well, also, yes, but also you go, like, there's stuff payoffs for shit that's, like, from decades ago, and it doesn't feel like, oh, yeah, he just was pulling something out of his ass. It's kind of like, oh, no, that makes sense, actually. Oh,
you mean
God.
actual foreshadowing?
What? Yeah, it's like he actually foreshadowed stuff like ages ago in like a comic, which is crazy when you have also thing like a Dragon Ball Z where it's clearly like you just made this shit up. Like I can tell you made this shit up because you just fucking let it drop the next chapter over where you're like, oh no, that sucked. Actually, he's got a third form that doesn't look like trash. Whoa.
Well, like didn't Toriyama actually like say in interviews and it's like, yeah, sometimes the editors just go like, yeah, just do this new thing. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm a jobber. I'll do it. I don't care. And he just does it.
Yeah, like, yes, that definitely happened with certain things. And there's also, like, there was a lot of cases with, like, certain characters, like, this villain, we don't like this villain. Make him more anime-like. That happens.
Or sometimes
times.
he just doesn't like the character design, so he just goes like, okay, new form. I like this one better. So he just does it.
Or he just
Toriyama is an interesting beast in that.
Or he gets he gets bored of drawing that design. Like, oh god, I made it.
Yeah,
too
exactly.
Hard to draw.
And so he then redoes it. It's just I kind of love. There's something lovable about that shamelessness, and it's.
I mean, what? Don't get me wrong. Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z has its charm. Like, I'm not denigrating it by any means. It is. I'm just saying, compared to it, One Piece is like fucking high literature.
Plotting. Yeah, no, it's a plotting nightmare.
Yeah.
Things could be charming without being good.
Oh, no.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, well, let's talk about something both charming and good. Well, spoiler, I liked this movie. Moana, released November 2016, produced by, of course, Disney, directed by Ron Clements and John Musker. These guys have mostly worked together on things. They did Great Mouse Detective, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, Princess and the Frog. So they were primarily 2D animators, and so this is their first CG thing. And originally they were trying to think about maybe trying to make this a 2D film. They then realized, I'm not drawing all that water, so we're going to go with CG for this one. And the screenplay was by Jared Bush from, I think he worked on Zootopia as well. And there is some 2D animation provided by Eric Goldberg, who has really long history at Disney and various other projects. He wrote a really good book, so for animators out there, check this one out. It's a character animation crash course. It is a nice guide that you use in addition to, let's say, the Animator Survival Kit, which teaches you fundamentals, whereas a character animation crash course is a bit more kind of like, well, you got these fundamentals down, how can I kind of execute good character acting? So, and he did the 2D tattoo doodles. Or not doodles, tattoo animation on Maui. So overall, I really like this movie. I think I want to start with the visuals because there's some more complicated plot elements that I find really interesting and fascinating. I think one of the things that has really plagued CG for a very long time is how do we animate water? I mean, like that is one of those things where it's like that's really. I think they figured that out in this case. Like, god damn, they figured out how to do the ocean on this thing. I was really impressed by a lot of that. It doesn't feel like it's just photography. They actually gave it a personality. They gave it kind of a specificity to how they did the color and the texture and the movement. So I think they kind of went beyond just trying to go with photorealistic representation and fluid dynamics. They kind of went beyond that. And I think that might have been a benefit of having people who were familiar with 2D animation produce a CG animated film. The colors were really impressive, and the overall lighting and storytelling. I mean, just, it's Disney. I mean, they got their visuals down. And one of the things that I really noticed a lot was not just the film, but like, so when you're sitting in the movie theater and you have all the previews come on, and for a movie like this, they target the specific trailers to people who, will want to see similar films. So almost all of it was CG animated trailers, things like Rock Dog and Boss Baby and things like that. And looking at that contrast between the visuals of those types of movies and what Disney puts forward, it's kind of stunning in a lot of ways. Just the attention to detail, the sense of texture and color and lighting is just much more, I think, just refined in a lot of ways. There's just kind of a verisimilitude that they work with that works really well. That's kind of like uniquely Disney at the moment. I mean, the difficulty I have with a lot of CG films is they kind of have this samey kind of look overall. So it's hard sometimes to differentiate when you have a specific art director being involved in it or kind of giving it a unique look. I mean, one of the reasons I really liked Madagascar way back when it first came out was just visually the fact that they weren't going for photorealism in a time period where everybody else was trying to be photorealistic. By allowing the characters to be kind of somewhat, cartoonish, abstract shapes and things like that. That was, at that time, kind of like a unique way of doing things. In this one, it has a unique view because it's so thoughtful. It doesn't feel kind of like, okay, we need a room, kind of make it generic. It looks like an IKEA room. It's like, no. When Disney does something, they build a room with specificity that reflects the characters. As an example, I mean, that's what feels like the big difference is. It's like when I look at even some of the illumination stuff, like the characters are too clean, they're too pristine. There's nothing kind of specific and off about them that makes them feel like an individual or a lived-in body, essentially. And sometimes I'll look at these backgrounds and I go like, okay, well, they're technically correct. That's great, but they don't really. There's something missing to them. They don't have enough detail to feel like they're a space that I'm believing in. So I think that's something that visually Disney elevates. I think overall, but Disney does, of course, have other problems in that many of its female protagonists have kind of looked alike. And I think this one, they kind of moved a little bit away from that to some extent. They were willing to do different body type, and her facial shape is slightly different, but still in that kind of Disney formula of how they do the proportions and the T-zone and what makes an appealing figure. Things. I mean, that's kind of like a formulaic thing. This is not Rango where they're going to embrace grotesquerie, but I think it was kind of a nice step away from what they had done with Frozen and Tangled. In certain ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So personally, I think this movie is stylistically and artistically, music, brilliant. Great stuff. I really didn't like the plot of it. I really didn't like the writing. I love the setting. I love, the notion of it. I like, I like the classical hero myth thing that they're doing with it.
Yes, that's the thing I liked about it. But yes, go ahead.
See, I like that notionally. I don't know if I actually like how they executed it because it doesn't actually matter that much. When you think about it, when you actually think about what actually happens in the actual story beats of it, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that ultimately is completely irrelevant to the overall storyline. All of the stuff about Maui, great character, doesn't actually contribute much to the whole of the story. They have the character arc with him. They do a thing with him, but it's also
he feels too much like a subplot to you.
Yeah, almost. Well, almost like he's there as a not so much a subplot as much as he's there as we need something else to do with this plot. Maui.
I can see that.
And how is it resolved? Oh, it doesn't actually matter that he's there at all.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually contribute much to the resolution of the film, except very barely.
Yeah, I get what you mean in that regard. I think that element is a bit undercooked, but I view it, okay, so let's talk about what kind of, in terms of what you said, mythology and things like that. I think this is definitely a departure for Disney in how they treat it. So okay, first thing we have to do is say, okay, fairy tales and myth are separate things. So, mythology has a lot more to do with, human religions and folklore and kind of there's a specificity to a lot of mythology, to a specific region, to a specific group of people. Fairy tales kind of take place nowhere. and they don't really explain phenomena in the natural world, and they don't always have to have the same structure. And I think you mentioned Hero's Journey, correct?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell,
yes.
famous mythology writer. I think he's really interesting, and I think people should read him. I don't think people should use his stuff as a Bible on how to write everything, but
Absolutely.
still very interesting, fascinating stuff. The Hero's Journey, probably something that is taught in some high school literature, but let's go through the basics. There are about, I think, 12 stages. The ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting with a mentor figure of some sort, like, old man, old woman, witch, wizard, whatever. You cross the threshold from the ordinary world to the kind of adventure, strange world. You have a middle period of tests, allies and enemies and, various deeds. You have kind of like the approach, which is when people are getting ready for, like in this case, it would be, we need to get the hook and get ready for this, face off with the fire giant, which we know is the big ending thing. You have that actual ordeal. You have what the reward is, the road back. Usually there's also something called a resurrection, although I don't always see that in myths, but that's kind of like a step 11. And then finally the return with the boon or whatever has been presented. And the thing is with this type of mythology, it's not always necessarily an external action that this defines. Sometimes this is an internal change. So this is watching a character, something about who they are, where they live, how they think, their lifestyle that needs to change. And, the adventure is them having to come to terms with that, become a different person and, return with that and kind of refresh things that have become stale. So in this case, I think Moana follows this pretty solidly. In many cases, it's kind of by the book because I think it is based in that kind of mythological framework. It spends a lot of time on refusal of the call, where should I go? Oh, shouldn't I? Oh no, I'm going to just stay here, be with my people. Now my dad forbids it. They really echo that a lot, like constantly.
Perhaps a little too much.
Yeah, it takes a lot. It's a lot of extra. It becomes kind of infuriating at the beginning because I go like, in my head, because I'm watching this with that framework and understanding in mind, I go, okay, you've established the refusal of the call. Okay, they're doing it again. Okay, we get it. We get it that this is difficult. That going beyond that reef, literally, the threshold from between the ordinary world and the adventure world, is physical version of that concept. Like we get it. It's dangerous. It just takes a while to just repeat it over and over and over again, and it gets very frustrating. But I think with Maui, is that he ends up being something not necessarily from the hero's journey, but from a concept that you would see if you read The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is Joseph Campbell's other work, which kind of takes the hero's journey and goes into more detail of it. He is kind of the archetype of the failed hero, kind of like how the father for Moana as well was kind of like the failed hero. He went to a certain few amounts of steps, but then something went wrong and he was never able to continue his journey, but he still, exists. So like, I would say a King Minos from Greek myth is kind of like the failed hero, in that he was supposed to do something, heroic and accomplish something and return with the boon, but he done fucked up. So he becomes the failed hero, who then becomes the basis for the actual hero. Like they become the soil for the next story. And I think what Maui is that he is that failed hero archetype for, the early part of the film, and then kind of redeems himself. So rather than like Moana's dad, who was kind of like the failed hero and had to kind of pass the baton to her, he was able to kind of take a little bit of his role back to some extent, but whilst also ceding the story to her. The only problem is that he ends up becoming a bit repetitive because Moana's father himself, with the whole storyline of him trying to have gone outside the reef and then losing his friend, already had that theme going.
I mean, the other thing with that is the sense that like Maui goes through the arc of becoming redeemed much before they actually get to the final confrontation. Like they go through that arc, they go through his character arc, but then they kind of like, we're going to actually dial it back because we aren't ready for him to be here. Because the actual real
they felt like they needed a secondary conflict, the all is lost moment,
But also, it's also
things like that have.
It almost felt like they kind of wrote themselves into a corner by like they made Moana too mundane, and Maui as a result, because Maui is like an actual like.
Well, yeah, he's an actual mythological figure in Polynesian myth.
But he's not even like a mythological figure. Let's not forget that Polynesian religion isn't like, entirely dead. It's like a living religion to a degree, within cultural practices. Like he is like the cultural hero of, Polynesia as a whole. He is basically their Prometheus. So like they can't.
Yes, exactly.
Though even in their myth, he's fucking dead. So, anyways. Yeah. So the thing is the sense that, like, he, as they even established in the story, like, he did phenomenal, deeds and saved the day. And then, the whole thing is like, hey, we're okay. It's fine to have him go through an arc. But then they realize afterwards, after they go through the arc, like, wait, we had him go through the arc, what felt like a natural place in the framework of the story. But it actually made the remaining conflict too quick because he is in fact too strong.
It feels like the timeline of his arc kind of was shifted backwards a little bit. Like his resolves too early, rather than it should have kind of in the ordeal itself. Moana's arc and his arc should have aligned there, as opposed to his ordeal having passed a bit earlier, and then you get hers. Almost feels like hers is just a remainder, even though she's supposed to be the main,
Sure. And the other thing, they seem to struggle with the fact, like, okay, Maui is literally a demigod who they outright say has phenomenal powers. So they basically say, oh, he's in fact too strong for this situation. Okay, so we actually have to make things, in order to make Moana important, we need to have him remove himself from the situation so that Moana, has to use her daring do to overcome something that Maui didn't. But that, in the process, makes Maui's entire, relation to the plot almost completely beside the point, except for like a minor 2 seconds there at the end. It's like he's entirely unnecessary for the final resolution. Like that story could have
the fishhook of this fishhook can only take one more hit. It's like, well, how do you know it will only take one more hit? Like this is a mythological thing. Like it's like, well, we have to raise the stakes. Okay, we have to make this thing seem like a sacrifice of choice by creating an arbitrary kind of like ticking time bomb, essentially. So that aspect is a little bit much. I mean, the fact that they also literally call only one more hit, it's like, well, you don't need to sit there and give a number to it. Just say like, this thing won't hold up under much more abuse or whatever, something like that. Like, or make his sacrifice feel much more important than it is. Like, I understand that they try to tie it to a psychological hang up he has. Without this, I'm nothing. I mean, literally. I think he literally states that line, without the without the soak, I'm nothing. It's like, okay, we get that. But the sacrifice of that isn't really given a lot of build up in due course during the actual sacrifice itself. And then he also gets a new one in the end. It's like, well, no, like wouldn't the lesson be much more powerful if he goes like, no, wait, I was actually able to do stuff without it. And I, now that I'm a self-actualized human being that has gone, who has now learned my lesson and changed internally, I don't have to rely on this anymore.
I mean, they could even have gone this far as saying like, oh yeah, like the fishhook was never really that important. You had to get it destroyed to find like, hey, now
or something like, yeah,
whatever. They could have gone any number of different directions with it, but no, like
a larger change, a fundamental change to how he, viewed his, relationship with human beings and with the hook itself could have been an opportunity there. Just giving it to him him that in the end, it's like, oh, okay, like, yeah. There's just a bunch of like weird structural elements like that just
stuck out to me while watching it. Like in general, like I don't dislike the film at all. It just didn't stick out to me as like a phenomenal film, just because there's a few just random weird things that kind of just made me go like, I don't know, like why, like the whole thing with the going to the underworld to get the hook, like fine, like you have to have some stuff in the middle, but it also didn't.
Well, that was a part of the approach aspect. Sure, so if you're going to go by mythological aspect,
sure,
you have that. I mean, and I don't even mind the fact that like Moana has to get a lot of help on her way, which
sure,
like
that's fine.
Which is fine, because like I think some people might criticize it going like, well, she doesn't do a lot herself. It's like, have you read a lot of mythology? Like a lot of the time the mythological characters are pretty much told what they're supposed to do to get rid of the problem by the wizard or the old lady and things like that all the time. Like it's like, oh yeah, it's like how do you solve this problem? Oh well, that she gave me the magic incantation. Like,
I mean, honestly,
that's fine. Like that's mythology. It's dealing, the entire movie itself. It's not a fairy tale, so you don't need to have, the character be this Ubermensch character that solves everything on their own. It's like, no, like look back in old myths, like the characters not often get helped along with things that they could never have possibly solved themselves. That's totally fine. And I think they made her and her grandmother an emotionally resonant thing. So she isn't just some, random old wizard or hermit that they encountered. It's like, no, it's someone that they established pretty well, that she's, the only one that really kind of understood her mentality, what she wanted. So like that paid off.
Yeah, but I would say from like a film narrative standpoint, like yes, the hero myths work that way, but the hero myths work that way because all those minor sub arcs within the structure of a classically told storytelling, like those are meant to be like spoken word stories.
Oh yes, I mean I'm not disagreeing.
And within the structure, they work.
Filmic storytelling is different.
Yeah, that's like that's the thing I struggle with here. It's like those work because like those episodic adventures are, hey, this orator came here and they're going to tell us this middle story in this grand, tale of, Maui or whatever.
Or here's how we explain natural phenomena.
Yeah, like here's an episodic thing. Like, oh, but with the thing you just said, like that would be like, oh, here's an episodic thing. And by the way, bet you didn't see this coming. That's how we've got a son.
Yes.
Boom! You didn't see that one coming. Like surprise! Like there's, in fact, that's how those.
Well,
there
are some self-contained myths, of course.
Sure, but I'm saying
in this case, this one is the epic journey style. So it has a lot more in common with Odysseus,
sure,
rather than a different type of myth, or Thor, like the journeys of Thor. It has more in common with. There is kind of a bit of an island hopping aspect. You have the coconut things, then you have the underground thing. I mean, that song just felt like kind of needless.
Sure. I mean, it was probably, I think, the worst musical number in the film.
Which is weird because the rest of this music is really good. I was actually really surprised that I didn't know that Dwayne Johnson had such a good singing voice, actually.
Sure. He
was really good. I think all the performances of this were just really good. Like, although I wondered why some of them spoke with British accents. Which is weird. Like her dad speaks British accent, but then no one else does.
I mean, it's because the reason is that they, almost all the cast are Polynesian, and a bunch of them are from New Zealand as opposed to Hawaii. So,
okay.
Like I believe her father is New Zealander,
well, either way, it just felt weird to not have that accent to be, transferred over from, parent to daughter.
Sure.
In a secluded island in which there is no immigration from other islands and cultures. I mean that was just a weird thing in the back of my head. I go like, wait, why does he? Huh. Okay. I mean, otherwise, again, the performances themselves, that is not getting in the way of the actual performance, which is, that's just me going like, wait a minute, this is a movie.
Yeah, I really like the soundtrack, though. To be fair, like I'll admit I'm a big sucker for Lin-Manuel Miranda's like music writing in general. I think he's
definitely talented.
He's very good at making catchy tunes.
Yeah. Well, I think the song at the beginning with her, longing for the ocean is really good, and one near the end is also like, which I think is kind of a reprise of that theme. It's just a really good song in general, like just really catchy, and she, the vocal performance is really strong. So, Also, it feels like a lot more meaningful than some of the other films that have had kind of like, the big hit song for it. Also, the animation sequence, I think, for Maui's thing is visually one of my favorites.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
That was a really inventive one. Like it was kind of neat having it break out of that reality and not just, here's some really crazy set pieces. It's like, no, we're actually kind of flattening it out to really feel a lot like his tattoos and things like that, which I thought was really neat. So that was really kind of a fun stylistic divergence in the film. But the crab one, the shiny song, that whole sequence just didn't really work. I understood that they put it in there to kind of reaffirm his powerlessness without his hook and things like that, and kind of he is the one that says, oh, well, the reason you want to be a hero is, tragic backstory. It's like, okay, so that was the whole point of it, was to let that little detail slip and then, create a villain from which they had to extract the magic hook. But that character of the crab himself was just really underdeveloped and uninteresting.
It also didn't tie into like the main like story at all. Like that's
yeah,
one thing
he didn't tie in very well. No.
Like there's a bunch of stuff here where the sense of like they were going for the whole thing with like with Tamatoa and the god thing with or no, not Tamatoa, with Tafiti was the goddess. But so the whole thing, like they were going obviously with the story circle there, but at the same time, like they could have done more with that in general rather than just having it so as generic as it turned out to be. Like I guess to a certain degree they didn't want it to have it stick out past the characters, like because the characters were really the focus rather than the actual storyline of what they were doing, But at the same time, like it didn't mean like the whole thing with not only like the crab but also the coconut guys felt really ancillary to a certain degree. Like it didn't really fit.
Well, the whole thing is like the reason people want this stone is they want the power of creation, which is like, holy shit, that's a really big thing. The villain that you can have with this could have an interesting and compelling reason that they want to acquire it. Like, why do the coconut characters want it? Like, what are they going to do with it once they get it? I don't know. They're just coconut guys.
Or hell, you could.
The crab guy, he just wants it because it's a thing that he can acquire. Like that doesn't have any stakes to like why do we not want them to have it?
Or with the evil goddess at the end, Teka, like they could have had her not be just mindless. Like they could have her like, oh yeah, taking her heart away made her turn evil. And in fact, you could have the twist like, yeah, by getting her heart back. And in fact, like, yeah, they were going through the adventure because, they had to do it a certain way or something to get her healed.
Well, what's nice is that, I didn't mind the whole like mindless without the heart thing, because I think what's interesting is there's kind of like a dualism to the character of the goddess, in that it is, the birth of new land and development, things like that is inherently violent. Like, lava and new islands, it's a violent act and filled with danger, but at the same time provides life and things like that.
I mean,
so
sure, like that's like cycle is fine, and like that's a thing that's is part of mythology. But the way that
what she's characterized, you mean, was
like
you wanted that heartless giant to have kind of some kind of thought agency behind it.
Agency is the key thing because like I said, like the lack of an agency to every villain or antagonist in this film really just kind of made it like. Was like they're jerking between conflicts at an arbitrary pace, and like they added that ticking clock element to try to make it work. But at the same time, like it doesn't like. As has always been said about these sorts of Disney films or just films in general, like the power. So much of the power of what makes them work is that the antagonists are likable in a sinister degree. Like, or actually, that's true for almost all writing. Like almost everything, like you have to almost like the antagonist more than you like the protagonist because that's how it works. Like a good comparison, I would say,
it might not be like, but it might be that you understand them.
Well, I would actually say like, not in the sense that necessarily like like you think that they're good people, but they have traits that you can admire in some way. Like I would say a good comparison to this film is let's go to another hero's journey film that Disney once produced. You remember Disney's Hercules, a not very good film, but it had a key thing that worked very well for it. It had a certain character the antagonist, Hades, is really fun. Now,
Yeah.
to be fair, that was almost entirely the acting.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, that's
to be
James
fair,
Woods being
Yes, being James Woods, sure. Like I'm not saying like that wasn't the main
Well, he also brought
there.
in an anachronism to it that I think worked, which is what helped. I mean, that's just but that's also a stylistic thing. I think I agree in that this film has no real villain, and the thing is like mythology works in terms of mythology. I mean, I think as we discussed earlier, everything in this film mythologically works out in terms of structure, but in terms of telling a film journey, it's a bit different. Like you can read the tale of Hercules and not necessarily have like a concrete villain, through the whole thing, which is fine because you're reading something with the framework and the mindset of, well, okay, this is mythology. It doesn't, it's not supposed to kind of follow a certain structure. There's, the way it ties its threads and it is just fundamentally different. If you try to translate that directly to film, you go like, well, this is not really satisfying. And I think that's the issue here, is that they while I love the fact that they took a mythological approach, it didn't get translated into a filmic framework as effectively as it could have. If that makes any sense.
Like, I'm glad that they took a real big risk with this to a certain degree. Like, in a variety of ways. Like, it is a departure both in terms of the casting, in terms of like, the kind of story that you're telling and what they're adapting into being a Disney film. And, they also took a very real risk of the fact that they were trying to create an animated film about a living world religion. That's a very tricky thing to thread. Like, they're able to get away with it.
Well, if you watch the credits, you could see like all the different people they consulted with, and that's the one thing I really like about Disney when they do their productions is they literally will send their artists and out to these places.
And to a certain degree, like they're yeah, and to a certain degree, they'll get away with this at all because it is a folk religion. Folk religions are built around the creation of characters and and making up tales. Like that is that's part of the soul of that style of religion. And of that kind of cultural practice to a certain degree. Like so they could get away with it. Yeah. Yes, you can get away with it a lot more than if like this is a film about how Jesus fought Dracula or whatever. It's kind of sense like that would not fly nearly as well because people are like you can't make any more. You can't make any more of this. There's only one of this. It's here in this one book. There's no more. There's nothing beyond this.
It's about translating a work to a new medium without being blasphemous.
Yes.
Like that's the best way that's the best short way I could do it is, okay, I need to retell this. I'm not a part of this culture, but I at least need to make sure I'm not committing heresy.
Yes, and there's a lot more room to get away with it, though. Like you said, they brought in a lot of cultural consultancy to make sure that they weren't stepping on anybody's toes and make sure that they were as sensitive to it as possible. And to be fair, they managed to really thread that very narrowly by them making again like the cultural hero of essentially all major Polynesian religions, making him into like a
quasi villain. Well, I think maybe what works with that is that because Moana is kind of separate from that, and that the situation in Moana is everything's deviated from the way it's supposed to be. Something's wrong. And so the idea is that, Maui is supposed to be this kind of Prometheus figure. So something's wrong here. Like something happened, and the natural order, not just in terms of like the world is getting all corrupted and dried up, but the nature of the mythology has somehow gone off course.
I mean, they were also able to get away with it to a certain degree because, like, Maui, in their own, in the myths, is not exactly always a greatest guy, as cultural heroes often are. They are flawed.
Trickster characters are a really common archetype in these types of stories. Reynard the Fox, for example, he's a protagonist, and he's kind of a picaresque dick.
I will point out that Maui dies by being cut in half by a goddess's vagina. That is, in fact, how he dies. He dies. In fact, I'm pretty sure he dies to the god, like, represented, like, the myth of this film is basically based around the story about how he gets cut in half by a goddess's vagina, trying to steal eternal life for humanity.
Yeah.
Because his brothers laugh because it was altogether too silly.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good. Can we
it's
just
pretty
say that's
good,
pretty
but I don't
good.
think Disney's going to be able to.
No, they're not going to
that.
be able to animate that. But I will say that's pretty good.
But I'd say Moana's deviation from that myth is better than what they did with Frozen's deviation from the Snow Queen.
Oh yeah,
like that.
Sure,
that was like, oh, yeah, we're just no, we're not even going to even try to tell that story. Versus this one, they go like, okay, we're going to do a little bit of a different theme here. We're gonna change the ending a bit, but the spirit will kind of be there, and we're gonna do it respectfully. But we're not going to show that. That is. Well, the thing is, it's like a lot of the mythologies end in ways that modern audiences would not be able to accept in a film. I mean, like just looking at a lot of the Greek ones, just the way things end somewhat tragically, or some of the Eastern mythos where death is kind of the end for the main character. But like if you read it in the context of those original things, that's not necessarily a sad ending. That's just the way that myth ends. It's one of those things where there's just a contrast in what people want out of stories. Why we tell them. Why we watch them. What we get out of them. What do we expect when we sit down to read or watch a story being told? Like what are the values that we come to a story with? And I think that wasn't really considered enough when they were making this film. In that they might have really emphasized that the mythology side and kind of went for the hero's journey thing, but in the end it didn't work as a filmic framework. It just didn't work as well as it could have, would be my argument in that regard.
Sure. And can we also very briefly say, God, why did they have to put in like comical animal sidekicks, and not just one but two comical animal sidekicks? Why?
I think that was a meta humor thing, which I mean,
was it?
Hey, well, because I think the whole thing is like, oh, there's always going to be the toyetic style,
the pig,
like for example, and so the irony of and having that not be the traveling companion is supposed to be kind of like a gag in itself, but it doesn't end up working because you need to actually kind of call a little bit of attention to the fact that, oh, no, I'm not doing the pig, I'm doing the chicken instead. Like that might have been a better gag. Or it's kind of like similar to it's like, I'm not a princess, I'm a mayor's daughter. It's like, well, you're a princess character. It's like there's all these winks and nods to these types of structural things. Luckily, they don't do a lot with Hey Hey, so he stays kind of out of the way for the most part. Like they mostly use him for, physical gags or in some of these action sequences, but they don't spend a lot of extra time on him, thank God. And also because he doesn't talk, he doesn't ruin the film like the gargoyles in Notre Dame ruin that film.
Sure, but at the same time,
here's a story we're telling. It's like, well, hold on a second. I need to have this character say, "Well, I farted."
But at the same time, he and the pig both feel like they're there because, like, well,
it's a Disney movie, yeah.
Well, also they're kind of like, well, what are we doing for merchandise, guys? So,
yeah, well,
right,
that's
what do we got here?
I literally said we're toyetic. That's what it means. Yeah. That's what toyetic is.
Yeah, I know, but
yeah. They're completely superfluous. They're just there. I mean, sometimes you need to have something lighten the mood, but I think honestly they could have just had the back and forth between. I mean, the ocean already filled that.
Oh yeah,
that already. Like that worked better as a comedic character that was kind of involved in the plot, better than what Hey Hey is. Just having that be the somewhat comic relief, but also related to the plot character worked well. Again, nonverbal. That was nice. But that you can't make a toy of the ocean. In that, so we need to have Hey Hey. We need to have whatever the pig was. So
yeah, and the pig doesn't even feature in beyond like the first 20 minutes or so. Like that pig is gone, but I've not been looking, but I guarantee that pig shows up in like toys everywhere. I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, well. Like I said, that is its existence, and I think that is also the meta joke, in that that's the one that is not the companion. So, but I think that's again, it's a meta joke, not necessarily executed really well, unless you were kind of looking for it. So, Yeah. I mean, honestly, you could just remove Hey Hey from it and nothing changes. Like, it doesn't even really, I mean, his existence doesn't really say that much about her either. I mean, like, her having, rescued him, it doesn't really even say that much. Sometimes they do that as a symbol of like, oh, that's what that character's, inner value and their kindness is. It's like, there's other ways you can display that. So, doesn't need to be Hey Hey, it can be anything else. And honestly, again, the back and forth between her and Maui works really good for the kind of, comedy conflict aspect. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Welcome to capitalism, Zorak.
Yep.
So, but I mean, yes. So, despite its flaws, though, I think it is worth watching. I think the artistry of this film is definitely like, I mean, it's Disney. They have a certain level of competence beyond a lot of other studios, and for a faceless corporate entity, they do a good job of this type of thing. So it's at least it's not Cars.
Yep.
And also I think it was good to see like a princess that wasn't really a princess character. Her journey is a lot different than a lot of these. There's no romance subplot. Like, holy shit. That was really cool. I liked that. I mean, this movie would pass the Bechdel test. There's some really strong aspects to it. Again, I think if you're a fan of mythology, you will get a lot more out of it than you would if you're trying to approach it as a regular, Western style film. That it might leave you a little bit hanging in that regard. So, but I think it's well worth checking out.
Yep.
So that is it for Moana. So next time we will be talking about the Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which I finished right before the crash of my hard drive, so I got that all done. If you haven't watched it already, it is quite long. It's going to probably take you a while. Well worth it, I think. But in that discussion next time, we probably will have spoilers. There's no real way to kind of discuss it without getting into that. So, yeah.
Yep. Well, we'll probably preface it because there's only a few spoilers I think that are like kind of like groundbreaking. And to be fair,
the thing spoils itself a lot.
Yes, and also it is big on the foreshadowing because it is framed from the standpoint of being like
a historical document.
Which it's like you don't.
Well, also the opening and ending, visuals pretty much tell you exactly what's gonna. It's not subtle about what's gonna happen overall. It's kind of annoying how it did that.
I mean, I think it works.
And some of the next episode things are like, next episode, this character dies. It's like, what?
Yes.
Come on.
I recommend not watching the next episode previews.
So, it's also a really old show. So if you're complaining about spoilers, just fuck you. It's an old series.
Or don't watch the episode, or watch it with the eye that, hey, you're probably going to forget who these characters are, by the time it happens anyway. So, hey.
Yeah. Also, there's a whole bunch of stuff that, it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Certainly.
So, all right. So we will see you guys next time. Back up your stuff. If your hard drive is starting to fail, back it up.
Bye.
Bye.